Tonight we continued reviewing the basic laws of a Noachide. What does one do when they are a Noachide? So last week we began discussing the fundamental laws of the Noachide, and we went through 3 out of the 7. We spoke about what are the ramifications of this belief in God, of no blasphemy, no eating meat from a living animal. Those were the 3 that we discussed. And now we are up to reviewing because these are things we know, but then sometimes we see nuances or we're like, oh, I didn't realize that was part of it. Or, oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I knew I shouldn't do it. Or maybe I didn't know I shouldn't do it. So the 4th one that I'm going to be touching on is the prohibition of murder. Within the prohibition of murder, we have a number of things that all, again, might not be directly murder, but would all be considered branches of that issue. Like, for example, abortion. Abortion is prohibited as a branch of murder. Unfortunately, today, that's actually something that is very relevant. When we look at these laws, it was very interesting to me that last week, Dixie was on, who is very often on, though I don't see her yet. And for her, this concept of the prohibition of the limb from the animal and crossbreeding and not getting pain and gelding, that was all something very, very, very relevant, because in her world, it's very relevant. Now, often in our world, it's not, because most of us aren't on horse farms, but she is. That is her world, and therefore it's very relevant. So similarly, this idea of abortion, unfortunately, in our world today, is something that's really relevant, because that's something which we probably all know people or know of people that struggle with this and that convince themselves that this is okay. And yet we're told, no, this is murder. Once that fetus is 72 hours old, this is considered murder. And therefore, it's something very important as a Noahide. You don't know who you're going to meet. You don't know what you'll become aware of. Very, very important to understand that if I know about it, if I'm aware of it, I have to try my best to do something about it to prevent a murder. Euthanasia is also forbidden, also considered a branch of not murdering. And there's details like moving a hospice patient in a way that could hasten their death. I remember actually once discussing this on a Noahide class, and one of the women on then worked in a hospice facility or with hospice patients, maybe in their home. And she understood totally what I was saying. And she said she really doesn't know what to do, because she does work with hospice patients and they are mandated to move them. And this could hasten their death. But what do? You have to ask a rabbi, because it's a very nuanced, very specific, very real question. Suicide. Suicide is prohibited, of course. You say, what's my relationship to suicide? But if you know someone in a situation, obviously, as a moral, good human being, you would do whatever you could to prevent it. Now you understand that God is saying that you have an extra layer of responsibility as a Noahide to make sure someone does not take a life that happens to be their own, but is considered a category of taking a life. There are situations where one could sacrifice their life if it was to keep the Noahide laws. In other words, just as similarly for a Jew, you're supposed to die rather than murder, rather than mortally injure, rather than engage in sexual abuse. For all of those, you're supposed to give up your life, and that's not considered suicide. That's what God wants from you, rather than do any of these things, which would be murdering or harming someone else. Just because someone is threatening you with your life, it doesn't give you the permission to hurt someone else to save your own life. For all other laws, for any other Noachide law, not required to die rather than do, meaning if a situation was such that you needed to do something that would harm an animal, which of course the Noachide laws are not allowed to do. But if it's your own life on the line, you're allowed to save your life and transgress this law. But we're told, again, very similar to the laws for a Jew, that if a person says, no, I'd rather die than transgress any of the Noachide laws, they're allowed to. Meaning for murder, for mortally injuring, for sexual abuse, in those you don't have a choice. God says, no, die rather than do any of them. For any other law, God is not requiring you to give up your life. You're allowed to give up your life rather than transgress any of the Noachide law, which again is very similar to in Judaism, where there are certain laws we have to die for. And then everything else we don't have to die for. But in certain situations, we're allowed to if we choose, but there's no obligation to. So it's a very, very similar concept. Only the prohibitions of murder is the prohibition to give over one person from a group. If there was a group of people and somebody said, well, turn over so-and-so, and if you don't turn over so-and-so, we'll kill you all. Are you allowed to turn over so-and-so? No. But well, they're going to kill us all. That's their choice. We're not allowed to murder. They're going to choose to kill. That's their end. But we're not allowed to murder. We're not allowed to turn over someone for death. In certain situations, of course, we said you're not allowed to suicide. But in certain situations, a person would be allowed to take their own life rather than be tortured, killed, taken in captivity, sexually assaulted. In any of those situations, one would be allowed to take their life if they felt that was a better option than any of these situations that would be worse for them, God forbid, including also in the prohibition of murder is that you are allowed to kill in self-defense. Again, very similar to Jewish laws in this situation. Now, if someone is trying to kill you, the first go-to isn't to say, well, let me kill him first. But if that is the only option, there's no other way to save your life rather except to kill your assailant, then the person is allowed to. Because again, at that point, since this person is attacking you, as we were just discussing recently, they're attacking you, then there is that permission. Not only are you allowed to kill a person who's trying to kill you if you have no other way of stopping them, but you also are obligated, as we were just discussing a few weeks ago, if you see someone trying to kill someone, and the only way to prevent them is by killing them, that's also what you're supposed to do in that situation. Again, it shouldn't be your first option, but if that's the only recourse, then one is allowed to do that to save another life. On a much more, maybe in our world, realistic level, because hopefully these things we don't have to deal with, but under the laws of thou shalt not murder is the prohibition to embarrass another person. Embarrassing someone else is considered a form of murder. Now just imagine when you know something, you could embarrass someone and you hold your mouth shut. You don't do it. You just fulfilled do not murder. And something else that we were discussing recently, gossip. Gossiping is considered another form of murder. Going to say something and you don't, you hold your mouth from gossip, you hold your mouth from embarrassing, that is fulfilling God's injunction not to murder. Unfortunately, in our world, has become very relevant recently, is surgical sterilization is prohibited and is prohibited under thou shalt not murder. Transgender operations are prohibited and prohibited under thou shalt not murder. It's forbidden both because it's destroying the body. God gave you the body. It's not yours to destroy it. And why is this under the laws of thou shalt not murder? It's nullifying the purpose of creation. You won't be able to have children properly. You are murdering the potential children that should come from you, but can't because of what you are doing to your body. And therefore, it's definitely considered part of not murdering. Natalie, were you going to add something?
The question is, so in regards to setting up courts of law, now, I remember on the books, like in the States or in the UK, there was a time, I don't know if it's still a time, when there was punishments of castration. I think it was typically chemical castration for so that was kind of my question is as a form of
a Noahide court of law would never give that as a punishment because it's prohibited, and we would not give a punishment something prohibited. I hear what you're saying. They gave this punishment for people that were to prevent them from doing certain things. I understand the point, but 100% forbidden because it's 100% against God's will. In other words, we're also supposed to view the body as sort of on loan to us. God gave us our bodies in his image. Now, again, that's an interesting question because God is not physical, of course. And we understand that, and we don't think that God is out there somewhere with a bigger eyes, ears, nose. No, we know he's not physical. And yet at the same time, whatever it means, we are made in his image. Spiritually, we're in his image, but this also reflects our physical reality. And our bodies are gifts from God. We honor them as such. And that's why, for example, this is not a prohibition for a Noahide, I don't believe, but a Jew is not allowed to have any tattoos. And the reason being is that you are blemishing the body that God gave you. I'm trying to remember if a Noachide is allowed to have tattoos. I think they're allowed to, if it's not an inappropriate one. But definitely the reason behind why even a Noachide would not have a tattoo is because the body is God's gift to us. We have it on loan. That's why we have laws about treating our body properly and of taking care of our health. And some people will say that It's part of wearing a seatbelt when you're in a car, or not smoking or drinking. It's all like this body is God's loan to us, and we have to treat it as loaned precious property. So definitely in Jewish thought, in a Noahide law, they would never have those punishments. They would take someone's life. Those are
right. That's what I was thinking.
Never castrate, because how could they give as a punishment something that's forbidden? The sages say that once it's been 72 hours since conception, this is viewed as life. We have to do whatever we can to maintain this life. Very interesting, because the sages said this like in the Talmud almost 1900 years ago. And now modern science also marks this 72 hours as like significant in the development of the child. But this was written in the Talmud a long time ago. Right, masturbation is also actually considered a form of murder and completely prohibited, as to a Jew and to a Noachide. Because again, this is potential life that's going to waste. It's considered a very wrong thing to do. It's considered something that weakens a man, that harms him, and is considered a form of murder because of the potential life that could not be, because it's being wasted. The next prohibition is forbidden relationships. We have the injunction to have marriage. That's part of being a Noahide, is getting married, having a family, having children. A divorce is not forbidden. But again, getting divorced properly, like getting married properly, is under the laws of forbidden relationships. Being alone inappropriately with a forbidden partner would be under the laws of forbidden relationships. And there's many details of laws of not being alone with a person where something inappropriate could occur. Homosexuality is absolutely forbidden. Of course, I'm sure you know, it's under forbidden relationship. Bestial relations, absolutely forbidden. It's not a modern phenomenon like all these forbidden desires. It's always been around, and it's absolutely forbidden under the prohibition of forbidden relationships. Adultery is absolutely forbidden. It's forbidden relationships. And then on the other hand is all the laws of modesty. Acting modestly, dressing modestly. Ideally, if you're married, covering your hair. Where does a Noahide have laws that they have to dress modestly or act modestly? It's one of the branches of the prohibition of forbidden relations. So in all of these things, what we are seeing, and I hope, of course, you know, and I'm reminding you of, is that on one hand, these are very big, broad things like don't murder. Okay, well, I'm saying I never would murder. Oh, well, actually, it also means this, and it also means this, and it even means this. So within no forbidden relationships, it also means dressing modestly. And with all the details of laws of dressing modestly, that's a branch of not to have forbidden relations. The next one of the 7 is stealing, theft, under which we have the obligation of returning stolen objects. We have the obligation of the prohibition of benefiting from theft. For example, if you frequent a secondhand store where you realize they are selling stolen items, you're not allowed to buy from there, even though you didn't steal and you have no clue who they stole it from. But buying stolen property is benefiting from stealing and prohibited under this prohibition of theft. False measurements under the prohibition of theft. Cheating, misinforming. If someone asks your opinion on something and you don't give them an honest answer because you're twisting the truth to make it more beneficial for you, that's considered a form of theft, right? If someone says, oh, I hear this item is on sale, or I saw this on Facebook, do you think I should get it? And you're thinking, ooh, I'd like that for my brother or myself or my cousin. No, I don't think it's a good deal. That's considered a form of theft. Borrowing without permission or not returning once you borrowed will be a form of theft. The laws of renting in a way that's appropriate. Otherwise, it's a form of theft. The responsibility for entrusted items. If someone says, oh, I'm going away for vacation, I don't feel safe leaving this in my house, can you watch it? You have an obligation to, if you agree, you don't have to agree, but if you agree, then you have an obligation to watch it properly. And otherwise, if you don't watch it properly, it's considered a form of theft. Collateral, encroaching on someone else's real estate property. All of these things which you might not view as stealing are all under theft. And then, of course, there's much more horrific things like kidnapping, like abusing a person sexually, or damaging someone else's property. And then there's something like if you find a lost object. It speaks in the Talmud of a great sage, a very pious person who was very, very poor. And one day by his house, they saw two chickens held together by a string or something. It's like, oh, well, these are obviously not wild, they're chickens. And to even have an identification, there's a string. Well, what are we supposed to do? He said, well, let's watch them. And then they had eggs. Then his wife said, what should we do? He said, let the eggs hatch. And then they had a yard full of chicks. And his wife said, what are you supposed to do? They're making such a racket. He said, let's sell them and buy goats. And then they bought goats, and then they tended their herd of goats. And many years later, someone walked by their property and said, oh, I remember I lost two chickens here a long time ago. And this great sage overheard. He said, really? Can you identify those two chickens? He said, sure, they were tied by such and such a string. He said, oh, here, I have your chickens for you. And he showed him a herd of goats. A herd of goats? He said, yeah, that's what happened to your chickens over the years. And that's, of course, a very, very pious and extreme example. That's not the literal law. The literal law would not require them to go to the extreme they went. And by the way, they were personally absolutely penniless. It's really held as a model for us to understand how precious and significant it is returning a lost object whenever you can. Another branch of this is eating at someone's home that you know can't afford to feed you. If someone invites you over for supper and you know they're really poor, they really don't have a lot of food, you can't go, because that would be considered stealing, taking the food out of their mouth and putting it in yours. And you're like, well, they invited me. What should I do? I remember I had the situation once after I had a baby. One offered to make a supper for me. And when my husband heard, he was very upset. He said, they don't have money. We can't allow them to make a supper for us. We're not allowed to, because it'll be taking food from them. They don't have food to give us. That's sort of like a hard, sticky situation to figure out what's the best way to handle it. But you're not supposed to take food from people that don't have. That would be considered a form, obviously not like kidnapping, but under one of the branches of stealing.
It just reminded me of something. So around 10 years ago, we're new in Canada. 11 years ago, I think. Then my friends, we go to food bank. I mean, out of balance. I mean, I like it. I mean, okay, this is new, all new to me. And then when I go home, my husband was like, why you go there? It's like, I mean, like what you said, it's like stealing, I mean, food or things from the people who needed it. It's just a reminder. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a great example. That is a great example. Like, I didn't do anything wrong. They let me take. Yeah, but he's saying it's not sensitized because you're taking that someone else who really needs it doesn't have.
That's and my reasoning was like, oh, my friends, do it. And I was like, I might as well do it. That's not the point. But now you mention it, it reminded me that, yeah, it's like you're stealing from, people who needed it most. Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Sure.
And again, it's a high level sensitization because technically you're doing nothing. They don't ask to see your bank account when you come. And if you're coming, take. And they're not, what am I doing wrong? It's a sensitization. It's being very sensitized, just like if someone invites you over and they don't have a lot of food and you're like, I'm supposed to figure out if they can afford or not to have me. And they invited me, what should I do? And it's a sensitization to people and to, again, it would be probably beyond what people call honesty, but we're calling it here honesty. Because a person's embarrassed. They're going to give you what they can't afford. And then you're taking from them what you shouldn't. You can't steal, so to speak, an advantage. Practical example, jumping ahead in line. If you can cut the line, that's considered stealing. And that's prohibited under thou shalt not steal. Natanya?
Yeah, I just wanna ask about that. So for example, okay, this person invited, me in their house, but at the same time I was thinking, yeah, maybe he is struggling with, financially, but at the same time, I wanted to boost her morale. I don't know if that makes sense. So is that an excuse for me to come, or should I stick to, yes, you mentioned that, it's like stealing food from them, and I should not come. But at the same time, I mean, she probably wanted to do something to make herself better by I don't know.
I totally
If that
understand what you're
makes
saying,
sense.
and I'm
Yeah.
saying it becomes a sort of sticky thing. And the best thing to do in that situation would be to say, oh, we don't really like eating out, but I'd love to take a walk with you. Do you love to spend some time with you? Do you, let's say, if you're walking your dog anyway, tell me when. I'll meet you at your house and we can take a long walk. So you anyway have to walk your dog, and I have your company, and I'd so enjoy spending time with you. Yeah, I'm not saying they have a dog. I'm just making up a situation here. But something along those lines, or that you sort of would like make an excuse, like, we have all different food allergies. We have all my children are so, specific in what they eat. I never eat anywhere out because it's just too much of a pain. But instead, I'd love to whatever. So it's not like I'm blowing you off. It's not like I don't want to spend time with you. I understand you want to be a hostess, but I want a hostess where you're not spending money on me that you don't have. So you have to try to think of a situation like maybe we can all get together and watch a movie, eat popcorn and whatever, do a project. So, you're not really taking real food from them, but they're still hosting. They still have that honor. And I understand 100% what you're saying, Natalia. And that's why I said having been in that situation, I know it's a very sticky situation. It's not simple because you don't want to say no and then make the person feel like, oh, you don't want to come to me because you probably don't think I have food for you. That would not be kind. And you don't want to go because that would not be kind. So you have to think of a clever way out that makes the person feel good and wanted and honorable and respectable and doesn't take their food. But it's interesting, like the idea of jumping ahead in line, like cutting the line. That happens when we drive. I think of certain situations where it's very easy for something like that to happen. And to say, this is considered a form of stealing. It's not forbidden to make a profit from gambling. In other words, is gambling considered stealing? Not the same way, but it's considered inappropriate for a Noahide to be involved with things like that. Why? Because a Noahide is supposed to make this world a productive world, a godly world, a civil world. And things like gambling do the opposite. So on one hand, one's not prohibited from gambling because that's not really considered stealing. People that gamble understand the situation. It's whatever it is, it is. Again, assuming you're being honest and not cheating in the gambling. Obviously, you're cheating, that would be forbidden. For someone who's just honestly gambling, it's not prohibited, but it's discouraged as something against the whole stealing tone of a Noachide. Something else that also would be considered stealing, you might not view as stealing, but raising a dog or a cat that is dangerous to small children is forbidden, and it's forbidden under the prohibition of stealing. Any extortion is forbidden under stealing, forcing someone to sell, forcing someone to buy, forcing someone to give you something. In general, stealing is something we have to be very, very careful about. It's very easy to slip because, bottom line, we live in a very dishonest world. And there's definitely the feeling of everyone does it. Everyone gets away with it. It's so easy to do it. There's so many things in our society that it's so easy to steal. Why am I different from everyone else? Part of not stealing is really a high level honesty, even in the myriads of situations that I'm sure we all encounter all the time. I encounter them all the time, where it's so easy to, not stealing, but maybe not just being 100,000 million% honest, because situations just seem to like crawl right into your lap, so to speak, and then just say, no, it's not worth it. I always thought it's not worth it. Whatever this is, it's not worth losing my honesty over this. It's not worth losing my honesty over this. Christelle?
Hi. It's so funny. My husband and I were talking about this today because it's tax time. And we were just talking about how, there's all these loopholes and stuff. And of course, we don't know like the way to fix it, but we were like, what if we just had like a flat tax for everybody, just pays us, a certain percentage according to their, income and so on and so forth, because it just seems like this is a very like, in line with what you're talking about as far as like stealing and honesty and stuff. It's like we all really have to pay our part and chip into society to keep everything going.
You are absolutely right. And definitely you're absolutely right. In America, yes, taxes is a great example of a tremendous challenge to someone's honesty, because everyone's doing it and everyone's getting away with it. And it's so easy. And that's what I'm saying. There's a certain challenge there that you don't feel, well, everyone's probably murdering and getting away with it. Everyone's being abusive and getting away with it, or everyone's grafting trees and getting away with it. But in honesty, there really is that sense of like, why am I like just being so, different in this way? And it's like, this is what God wants. This is what God wants. And it's a big challenge. Absolutely. 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 And it's just one area where you could really feel, okay, God, this is for you. I'm sacrificing for you. Money's tight. I could do this. Everyone else does this. I know I get away with doing this, and I'm being honest for you. So that's a very practical way to really bring God into your life, because the only reason you're doing this is for him. And that's very strong, because again, it's very real. It's not like, well, maybe I'm going to find a situation. This is real, and we deal with it and we live with it. Just like, Natanya was saying about her example with the food bank, that's very real. It's like, what? Here's free food, and I'm not doing anything forbidden, and why not? And my friends all do it. And to say, this sensitization, yeah, it's free food, but maybe I should leave it for people that have far less than me and are really hungry. It's a way of bringing God into the very, very, very details of your life. The last of the laws of the 7 in the order we somehow came to is establishing courts, as Natalie mentioned before. Now, of course, we don't have this ability now. You don't live in a country and in a society that is run by Noachide, and therefore there are Noachide courts. But under your personal lives, laws that apply to you under this branch of establishing courts is honoring your parents. Honoring parents is fulfilling a Noachide law. It's under the establishment of courts. Charity is very, very significant for the Noachides. It's a very important commandment. God wants Noachides to create a civilized world, and in a civilized, moral, just world, people give charity. So charity is an obligation on the Noachide. Honoring parents, which is a tremendous, law, tremendous commandment, is an obligation on the Noachide. It's very good for Noachides to know these things, because sometimes Noachides have this feeling of like, well, if I'm serving God as Noachide, it means a bunch of don'ts. Like, don't murder, don't steal, don't curse. All right, so if I'm good with the don'ts, I'm serving God, but I don't feel like I'm doing anything. Once I got the don'ts under my belt, so to speak, once I'm making sure I don't, then what am I doing for God? So now we come to things you can do. Honoring parents is a very big, consuming, broad obligation, very significant, incumbent on the Noachide. Charity, very significant obligation, incumbent on the Noachide. The obligation to do kindness, doing kindnesses, is incumbent on the Noachide under establishing courts. Societal morality, all the different morals of having a good, healthy, ethical society, anything that you would call like an ethical norm, is all truly an injunction, and it's all under establishing courts. So there's so many branches of just being a good person, like our sages enumerate in Ethics of the Fathers, just in being an ethical, moral person. And this being an ethical, moral person is under establishing courts. Now that we sort of reviewed the basic laws, which again, maybe reminded you of something you forgot, maybe taught you something you never knew, maybe was a review of everything you already knew, what would you tell someone else to explain to them why they should be a Noachide? Or if you can't explain to them why they should be a Noachide, to share why you are Noahide with an eye to inspiring them. And whatever you're sharing with someone else, anything that you're trying to do to bring them closer to God, it's always important to remember that as long as I know two things, I'm not wasting my time. If what I'm saying is true, and what I'm saying comes from my heart, then surely it penetrates the other person. Because sometimes you could talk and you could feel they're not really interested, they're not listening, I'm not getting anywhere. Did what you say was true? Did it come from your heart? If it's true and it came from your heart, for sure, what you said penetrates. So any thoughts on this? Any thoughts? Knowing what you know, what it means to be a Noahide and trying to reach someone else with that. Danielle?
Yeah, sorry. I would just say that, before I was following these laws and things, I was more looking towards what I thought was morally right and wrong. And I do know that there are a lot of people that do that, or maybe they look to the legal system on what is right or wrong. Like, for example, it's wrong to steal. It's, wrong to do certain things. But there are things that are legal that, of course, we believe are wrong and that we should not be doing them. And so, something I have said or will say to people is, just following what the legal system is telling you is right or wrong, or what you just naturally think is right or wrong based on just how you feel about certain things, it is not enough for God. And He wants you to follow these laws. And it brings you a more meaningful life. It brings a better world. So yeah, those are just my thoughts as you asked.
That's so beautiful. It's so interesting what you're saying, because I'm reminded of two different things as you said it. One is my husband was playing some interview with an Orthodox Jew who is a federal judge. He was explaining all it means, a federal judge, and all that situation. And he was explaining, which I think, aligns with what you just said, Danielle, that as a federal judge, he has to give verdicts that could be completely against his own value system, because a judge is not giving you his value system. A judge is following the law. He could completely disagree with the law. The law could be completely wrong, but that has nothing to do with being a judge. A judge can't give a verdict. Well, actually, this is a wrong law, and therefore, in this case, no, you can know the law is completely wrong. It's got nothing to do with it. Your job is to enforce it. So I think that's very case to point of what you're saying, Danielle, that we could be looking to the law and saying we're moral people. We abide by the laws and we live in a pretty good country. It's a democracy, and which it is, but there could still be very wrong laws, as obviously, of course, we all know there are. I was also thinking of what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe brings out this point very strongly, that when society only turns to itself to determine right and wrong, they could fall to the worst, most horrific, abhorrent behaviors.
Yeah.
And feel they're very moral because this is what they agree to as a society. And unfortunately, the Rebbe pointed a case to Germany and the Holocaust. That before the Holocaust, if social history, Germany was considered like the most cultured country, the most educated country, the most advanced country in Europe. And from this country came a Holocaust, came the annihilation of men, women, and small children, 6 million Jews. I don't know how many gypsies, how many homosexuals, how many Down syndrome children and other special needs children, how many soldiers that were, wounded at war that they also killed off. All of this murder came from what was considered the most cultured society of the European world. And it's just a case to point of when man is the one that's determining what's right and wrong. You know, our minds can twist us in any direction. So that's a very, very strong point, that we need an absolute right and wrong, and an absolute right and wrong only comes from God. That's very, very strong. I think that's a very, very strong point. Anyone else? Knowing the laws, living the laws, and of course, and I know we come back to this many times because I feel it's very, very important for every Noahide to feel very comfortable and confident in speaking to other people, just inviting them, making it open to them, making it accessible to them. Obviously, everyone's on their own journey, and obviously, it's probably not going to be a 5-minute conversation that's going to bring someone to turn around their whole life. But it's another drop, another drop, and you never know what is going to be that conclusive point that will help a person make that decision of, I want truth, I want to live a godly life, and I see this as how. So I believe every Noahide very, very strongly has to hold tight to their heart that moral obligation to share the wealth, to share with other people, and to know what you would say. Again, it might not happen to every time you're on the phone with Comcast or in the grocery store, but there will be opportunities, and you never know who you speak to and where they'll take it. Anyone else have what they would say or do say to people?
Cyril, I was just going to say, I feel like just giving people the knowledge that, hey, this is out there sometimes, this is another option, and talking about it, and just showing them that there is another way of thinking about everything is sometimes, just very helpful. I mean, like you said, sometimes we don't know what'll happen with it or whatnot, but, we do live this very, I don't want to say simple life as a Noahide. However, I feel like it kind of is. I feel like that there's like a freedom to it. It's like I get to just really concentrate on my relationship with God and following his laws, and, which are just the right thing to do anyway, but that it benefits, so many ways, because it allows me to actually understand what that relationship is, and move toward it in a way that I wouldn't have ever before. And it also allows me to do it just because I am, a child of God, so to speak, versus I have to do it because I am assigned to a specific thought process, or I'm going to say religion. I don't know. I think sometimes Noahides, and I was going to talk to you about this from last week, but I think sometimes we feel like we need to do more, or, and some of us are led to do more than others. And as far as following, specific laws and Torah, and how close do we get to, being, following and being, I don't want to say Jewish, because you'd have to convert to be Jewish, but, doing so much. But I appreciate the simplicity of it, and that we don't, and that so many things are options as we feel led that we need to do it. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. And I actually agree with you in that. I would phrase it a little differently, but what you're saying, I would view as the greatest way to help someone else become a Noahide is your own example. Meaning, as you're saying, just by being out there with people and sharing with them what you're doing, and your example of living a godly life. That is truly the best advertisement. You're God's walking billboard. And if people see you and they're like, oh, she's content and she's happy and she has a healthy marriage, and they're raising a healthy child in today's world, and simple, meaning pure, meaning not part of all the junk that seems to be clogging the arteries of society. And that's very true and very appealing. Absolutely. And I do believe that's true. I don't think you're wrong at all. I think you're actually very right, that just by sharing with people, oh yeah, like, wait, where's your TV? Oh yeah, we didn't want to, again, not that TV is forbidden, but if you don't have a TV, as a Noahide, we choose to surround, we want different energy in our house than that. It's
Why do you have all these books?
Or all these books. Yeah, it's a different feeling in your house. There's a more godly feeling in your house. And when people are sensitive and they come to a house, they feel it. They absolutely feel it. And
That's 100% true. I was just going to jump in here, Cheryl, and say that's 100% true. That's really what was a big impact to me and a bunch of my friends in high school, is when we would go to my best friend's house. You could just feel it when you walked in the door. And their family wasn't perfect. They had a lot of imperfections, so to speak, but you could tell like there was something up there, and we all said that we wanted to have a marriage like her parents.
So Natalie is saying, yes, she's been on the receiving end of walking into that house, and she felt it. She knew it was a different house. There was something different there. And she said it wasn't a perfect house. Wasn't a perfect house. But she saw there was something there that wasn't in generally the world around her. And I think people see that. So, and even if they don't see you at home, and they don't see you interacting with your husband, they don't see you interacting with your children, but just each Noahide should have a certain inner peace that is just very obvious. And it's like, wow, I want what you have. What do you have? Oh, what I have, I'm a Noahide. That is being God's billboard. I think what Danielle said is so true. And I think what Christelle is saying is true. And I think they go hand in hand. And I think because people sense that you have something so special, that then when you share your thoughts and your choices and why you lead the life you do, people hear you. It doesn't mean they're going to change today, but maybe they will. And maybe they'll make a change. And maybe, we always look for opportunities. Give a card that says the Noahide laws, talk about it a little, explain, even in a very short way. And then hopefully the person will move on. You've triggered something, and they'll hear something else from someone, or they'll explore, or they'll go online, they'll read a book. What you're saying is just going to be an impetus to help them get closer to God.